Welcome to Kicker News. I'm Max Bacco. The countries of Belize and Guatemala are going to the International Court of Justice to settle a centuries-old territorial dispute. Since the 1800s, Belize and Guatemala have never fully agreed on where their border should be. Belize says it's defending land that's rightfully theirs, while Guatemala argues the border was never properly settled. Hannah Lee is from Belize. She's lived in Newfoundland for 6 years. The dispute back in Central America may affect her immigration status in Canada. She's here with me now. Hello, Miss Hannah. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tell us, why does Guatemala claim parts of Belize?
As time passed and the amount of colonies grew, since Spain had so much to manage, they ended up appointing Mexico as the overseer for all Spanish territories. After Spain and Mexico had issues and Mexico declared independence, there was no longer any territory responsible for overseeing everything. So the original claim that Guatemala puts forth is that due to it being in proximity to Mexico and there no longer being an appointed overseeing territory, all unclaimed territory in Latin America should belong to them. And being that Belize is a neighboring territory, they felt that it was their right through Spain that they should have been given the land. That was the original claim.
Has Guatemala ever tried to invade Belize?
Unfortunately, several times. So after that original claim, after it became a colony, a British colony, there were several instances when Guatemala put forth proposals that they should consider relinquishing the territory to them. Naturally, upon declining, they tried to work out an agreement where England had agreed that they would build a road from Guatemala City to the Atlantic for trade, and in doing so, Guatemala would agree to relinquish their claim to Belize. However, over time, Belize acquired their independence, and since it was no longer British territory, they no longer felt the need to follow through on that agreement and build the road for them, since they said it was no longer a colony of theirs and it wasn't necessary for them to intervene any longer. As a result, Guatemala then claimed that since they never fulfilled their part of the agreement, that everything sort of reverted back and they were able to claim it once more. Since then, I believe England had an agreement with Belize. I'm not quite certain for how long, but they were to maintain a British military presence in the country to defend from invasions. I know that my mother, who grew up in a neighboring village to the Guatemalan border, has so many stories, even in childhood, of people having to run underneath their beds because they could hear the military planes coming overhead, and then the British military planes having to meet them in the airspace and have them turn around. However, over time, now that that agreement has ended and there's no longer any British military presence, the amount of intimidation has increased immensely.
So this dispute has gone on to the International Court of Justice. How did Belize decide to take that dispute there?
So, although there were several attempts to resolve this peacefully and diplomatically, it hasn't always been carried out that way. And there have been several instances where misunderstandings have occurred or incidents of violence have occurred near the border, either through poaching or attempting to take protected species, and so on and so forth. And that ended up to escalations where there would have attempts at military invasions that were fairly recent. So the two countries came together and agreed that they likely were not going to reach an agreement on their own. And they decided that they would take the issue to the International Court of Justice to be settled. From there on, both countries held a referendum and to see sort of whether the people themselves were in agreement to take this issue to the court.
So how long do you think the trial is going to be until a result or a ruling is given?
Unfortunately, a legal woman I am not, and I have no idea. From my understanding, complex legal situations, especially between countries, would take several years. I believe we were told to anticipate the first of the proceedings in the following year. However, for whatever reason, that date was moved up to, I believe, late November. But if we had to make a guess, I would say it would likely be a few years of back and forths.
So what's going to happen to you if the court rules in favor of Guatemala?
Well, when they were deciding whether to go through with the referendum or not, the government decided to launch an informational campaign, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, along with a few other people that worked in international affairs, went on a small tour of the country and held informational town halls in villages and towns and in the two cities for people to learn about what the implications would be if we were to go to court, and for them to ask their questions. All of these sessions were televised, and I believe that there was someone who at some point did directly address the Minister of Foreign Affairs and ask, if we are to lose the court case, what will occur to essentially the citizens of the country? And the Minister of Foreign Affairs clarified that essentially we would become political refugees. Well, that was his own words. Since a lot of people that live in the north tend to have dual citizenship with Mexico, presumably they would be safe, but the majority of the country that does not would either have to flee to Mexico, attempt to apply for citizenship with Guatemala, or migrate to a different country.
Well, what do you hope would happen now, going forward?
My humble opinion. I was always in disagreement with going to the ICJ to begin with. The reason being that I believe even if there were to be a positive outcome where the court would rule in our favor, I don't believe that that would necessarily stop the attempts at invasion or the attempts at intimidation. My reason being that even though now it has already been concretely decided that we would go to the International Court of Justice, and the first of the proceedings is looming very near, we still have incidents where the Guatemalan military will go to the Sarstoon, which is essentially maritime territory of Belize, and set up Guatemalan flags in that space and refuse to let both citizens and Belizean military enter their own territory. So at this point, since it's already been decided that we are going to court, I can only hope that the court would rule in our favor, given that their claims don't have any concrete standing, and just, I suppose, hope that they would cease with their intimidation attempts and military invasions.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Ms. Hannah. Come back often to kickercna.ca for more stories. I'm Max Bacco. Thanks for watching.